And welcome back to Pizza Class. Today we're going to talk about the Margherita pizza. Now the Margherita pizza is a legendary, classic, basic pizza that everyone should know how to make, and hopefully everyone's had a chance to eat. The Margherita's legend starts with a baker in Italy who was being visited in his town by Queen Margherita. And of course he wanted to impress her, so he made a flatbread, and on it he placed ingredients that were the color of the Italian flag. What are those colors? Red, white, and green, of course. So for red, he included tomatoes from his hometown. For the green, he used fresh basil leaf, and for the white, he used soft, fresh mozzarella cheese. And a classic was born. So let's learn how to make this classic dish. We're going to stick to really basic fundamentals here. The idea is simplicity for this pizza. The flavor combination is what makes it successful. So for the Pizza Margherita, we're going to start by talking about our equipment and then our ingredients. So what kind of equipment do we need for this basic pizza? Well, not much really. We've got our pizza screen, which I talk about in the pizza equipment lesson. We need a strainer to strain our tomatoes and a can opener to get them out of the can. Other than that, we don't need a lot of equipment for this pizza, which is one of the best things about it. Now, as far as ingredients go, there's just a handful here. We're dealing with, first of all, our San Marzano tomatoes. This is one of the recipes where I highly recommend looking for the San Marzanos. And the ones that are actually from Italy that say they're imported on them are the best. These will do just fine. They're inside of a basic sauce, which we'll drain out, and I'll show you how to do that. And for the second color of the Italian flag, we've got fresh basil here. I love the fresh basil. You can get this at most of your grocery stores, or you can grow it yourself. Just the aroma is wonderful. Just having it around the kitchen is great. And then, of course, our fresh mozzarella cheese, which we talked about in our episodes on cheese. This is a moist, fresh cheese that we're actually going to crumble onto the pizza. No need to grate it or prepare it ahead of time. And then we're going to have some olive oil. You can use extra virgin olive oil. I like just plain olive oil, just fine. And we're going to add some garlic to that. Just minced garlic, or you can crush your own fresh garlic, which is even better. But I'll show you how we're going to infuse our olive oil with garlic just for a little bit of an extra zing. And just a tiny couple of pinches of course sea salt for the top of the pizza. Some people put other things on their Pizza Margherita, but I like to keep it super, super simple. And so let's get started. We'll take our strainer and our can of San Marzano tomatoes. Open that can up. And this is a little messy, so you want to get your hands in there. Just go ahead and get as much of that water out of those tomatoes as we can. And I'm just going to crush that, just like that in my hand. The amount of crushing you do completely depends on your taste and what you like. I like there to be chunks of tomato in my actual bites of pizza, so I don't like to crush it too much. I also like to pull out these green stems and just leave those in the bowl. I don't need those. So you can see these whole tomatoes just coming out here. This is just lovely. It's actually kind of fun. We get to mash up the tomatoes by hand, and this is going to be tremendous flavor. Again, the goal is to get a lot of that water and concentrated juice out from our tomatoes. So it's okay to lightly press on those inside of the strainer a bit. You don't want to press them through the strainer, but you do want to make sure you get most of that moisture wicked out of there. When you're making pizza, generally speaking, moisture is not your friend in toppings. It can cause your crust to become soggy, and you really don't want that for that crisp crunch on your pie. So we've got to be a little bit careful that we don't allow too much water and moisture from our fresh ingredients to come through on the top of the pizza. And that's especially important for this little guy. One can should yield enough for the top of our pizza. We're done with our tomato prep. Now some people like to use all of the juice inside the can from the San Marzanos, and some people even blend them. In fact, if you go to a classic Napolitana restaurant that specializes in making true Neapolitan Napolitana pizza, they are actually going to use a really well blended base for their Margherita pizza. And that might be your style as well. All you need to do is blend that fleshy stuff up a little bit in a food processor, or even mix it more by hand. Just get nice, and maybe even add some of that sauce back in if you'd like. I like mine to be more chunks of tomato on top of the pie. I like how it looks, I like how it tastes, so I'm going to stop with processing like I did by hand a little bit. Now, what I also like to do is get my basil and pull a few of these leaves off, like full leaves. We're going to do that because they look really good on top of the pizza. I'm doing this ahead of time because one of the things you have to keep in mind when you're making pizza is you don't want the pizza to be stretched out and waiting for toppings for too long. Okay, it's one part in this entire process of making pizza where you want to try to hurry a little bit. You don't want to rush any of the other parts of the process, but when you're topping your pizza, you definitely need to be a little bit quick about it. The reason for that is on a screen, that dough begins to sort of settle into that screen, and you could end up sticking to the screen. It's rare, but it could happen. This is even more important though when you're using a pizza peel to slide pizzas into ovens. So if you're using pizza stones in your oven, or if you're using a brick oven or a Blackstone oven, you only got a few seconds while that dough is on your peel before it absorbs the flour you use to slide it on, and it begins to stick to the peel. Most of the mistakes and problems I've had ruining entire pizzas has been from my pizza sticking to the peel. You don't want that. So I like to do as much prep of the actual toppings ahead of time as I can. And that's what we're doing here. So we're going to pick a bunch of our basil leaves. This also gives me a chance to clear the stems off. Some people like to chop their basil. I don't. I like the basil to be whole leaves. I think it looks pretty cool. And I like to save one of the full flowerets like that for the top as well. I think it looks neat to put that right in the middle of the pizza. One thing about basil you should know is if you don't use it all, that's completely fine. Basil actually freezes really well, so you can put basil in bags of plastic. I won't use this whole plant today, so I'll put the rest of it in the freezer. Or this actually came with soil, so I could even try to keep that alive by planting it in a pot. So we've got our basil, we've got our tomatoes over there getting ready. We've got our mozzarella cheese. Not much prep to do here because with this mozzarella cheese, I'm just going to be pinching off pieces of it, and I think I can do that fast enough, so I'll just leave that alone. And then the next thing we need to do is take some olive oil and pour it into a small bowl. Decent amount, 2-3 tablespoons of olive oil. That's going to be drizzled on the top of the pizza before it gets cooked. And we're going to take some minced garlic. I love garlic. So I'm going to take a couple of teaspoons of that and mix it in with my olive oil. We're going to infuse that olive oil with some garlic flavoring there. I'll probably take a little pinch of salt and allow that to mix in there as well. You can either put that in a little frying pan to heat it up and allow the flavors to come out, or what I'll actually do is place that in the microwave in a second as we begin to get ready for our pizza dough. So we've got our basil, we've got our tomatoes, we've got our olive oil, we've got our mozzarella cheese, and we have our pinch of salt ready to go. We are ready to top this margherita pizza. I just brought this dough ball out of one of our containers from the dough that we made a couple of days ago. And I like to work on a board of wood. I like to sprinkle the surface with a little bit of flour. This is, again, my Caputo 00 flour here. This is the flour that is finely ground, and it's used for really high temperature ovens. I also love it just as instead of semolina for my work surface. It's tremendous. It doesn't burn. So I also like to toss my dough in that flour, which is why I like to keep that bucket around, which gives me a nice workable surface. Now, what we're going to do to shape this dough, as in our other efforts, is we're going to create this crust with our 3 fingers, and our other hand is kind of cupping around the outside. We're just spinning it and giving it a nice crust. You want to be sure not to touch the edge of the pizza and squish the crust too much, because that takes all the air out, which is what we want to form the handle of the pizza. And most people like that to be nice and fluffy. So you don't really want to squash that. We're sort of working our way around the edge here, creating that crust. And that's going to be our no-go zone. Now I'm going to press out the middle just enough to level out any bubbles. And we're ready to begin stretching. Now this dough has been out for well over an hour and it's come fully to room temperature. It's very workable, as you can tell. Now what I'm doing here is I'm taking my hands as fists and I'm just putting them right under the crust edge and I'm stretching that out. This is how I like to stretch this pizza. It's the least damaging to the dough. You can start to see the shape form there. You could toss it if you'd like at this point using just the tops of your hands. But again, I don't have to work this dough very hard because we let it come to room temperature and we allowed that dough structure to form a couple of days ago. So we've got ourselves a really nice pizza here. And here's a pizza screen. We're gonna lay that down. We're ready to put this little guy on there so we can set that guy. Now this is a 310 gram dough ball and you can see that just about covers a 16-inch pizza screen, as you can see there. So that's not bad at all. And now we're ready to, it's a little smaller than 16 inches, which is fine for this pizza. Now we're ready to add our tomatoes on top. And this is only one can, so it'll be barely enough to cover this pizza here. You don't really need to do too much spreading. In fact, when you're using a pizza screen, you don't really want it to be something that you're touching too much. But I'll just kind of spread that out a little bit with my fingers. Again, you don't need a lot of tomatoes for the flavor to come out in this pie. I could probably do it with a little more, maybe with a pizza this size, but that's going to be just fine. Next up is our cheese. Now this is our soft mozzarella cheese, so we're just breaking this off in little 1/4-inch to 1/2-inch chunks, spreading that out on the top of the pizza. And the idea is that these chunks, these little globs of cheese are going to melt really nicely for us here. Use 5-6 ounces of fresh mozzarella on these. Don't need 8 ounces or anything like some of the bigger packages that they sell. Just buy one of these balls for each pizza that you plan to make. Now notice I can take my time a little bit on this because I have a pizza screen. If I was doing this on a peel, the whole time I'm topping this pizza, the flour is being absorbed that I used to keep it from sticking to the peel, and so you've got to be in a bit more of a hurry. I'm not rushing myself here because I've got a screen and they don't stick nearly as often. There's our mozzarella cheese, about 6 ounces of that. And now our fresh basil goes on. In true Napolitana form, the basil goes on before you bake it. Now, in a home oven, it's more likely that this basil is going to dry out a little bit because it's going to be in the oven for a good 8 minutes. So if we had a high temperature oven, that wouldn't be as much of a concern, but probably are going to see that this basil dries out a bit. But we're just going to be pretty generous with the basil so everyone gets a bite when this comes out of the oven. And it will shrivel up a little bit too, so it's okay to tear it if you need to cover spots that don't have green. So that looks pretty good. We have starting to look like the flag of Italy there, so we're pretty excited about that. And again, our garlic infused olive oil, just give that a stir. I got this out of the microwave after just 30 seconds or so. And again, this is just olive oil, a little bit of garlic, minced garlic this time, and I'm just going to go in a circular motion pretty liberally with that olive oil on top of this pizza. These spots. This is going to be just a really great flavor infusion. Don't be afraid to toss that garlic on there. That's 2 or 3, probably 3 tablespoons of olive oil and some garlic. I put a couple of teaspoons of garlic in there too. All right, so that's going to sit on there, and then we take a pinch of sea salt and we just give it a little bit of sea salt on the top, and this is ready to go into the oven just like that. Our pizza margherita is ready to go. The oven has been preheated for well over an hour. It's up to 485 degrees, which is the minimum I would say for temperatures for this. We're just going to take that guy and slide it right on in there. We're going to check that pizza in about 8 minutes to make sure that it's done. Now, keep the door closed on that oven for as long as you can. You don't want to be checking and opening that door, because every time you do, the heat from the oven can escape And we don't want that. We want to keep that heat in there to bake our pizza. So in 8 minutes, I'm going to give that another look. Okay, this pizza is just about ready to come out of the oven. If we take a look at that, you can see the wonderful texture and flavor of that crust is just well developed and starting to brown just perfectly. The cheese is melted and bubbling very nicely on there. So we've got ourselves a wonderful looking pizza margherita here. We're going to bring that over to our table. Now you should be able to cut this with a normal pizza cutter, but I like to use what I call a rocker cutter or a rocker knife. Make cutting the pizza a little easier. You should hear that crunch. That is all the work we put in to the pizza dough earlier in the day, which allows us to put that fresh basil right on top. And there you have a pizza margherita. It just does not get any better than this classic recipe. And it's time for us to take a taste. I hope you enjoyed this making of the pizza margherita. Let me know what you think of your pizza margherita after you try it yourself.